Welcome to the Knowledge Sector Indonesia podcast series. You can watch and listen our podcast at www.ksi-indonesia.org. Today we will discuss these questions with Jessica MacKenzie, who wrote a working paper on establishing government think tanks, drawing upon the expertise of the Overseas Development Institutes, the activities of the Knowledge Sector Initiative, and comparative models within Southeast Asia and other regions.
Bappenas is the central Indonesian government institution which is responsible for the national development planning and budgeting. And in 2014, I think it was in October, their minister announced the intention to reshape Bappenas as a presidential think tank, or to create that within Bappenas. And so this paper draws upon the expertise of the Overseas Development Institute and the activities under the Knowledge Sector Initiative, and it looks at comparative models from across Southeast Asia and beyond to provide some really practical recommendations for Bappenas as it goes through thinking about this sort of issue, and also for any other government institutions in Indonesia looking into this space. Well, a think tank is, of course, quite independent, and it provides research and policy analysis and engagement, whereas a government think tank is a little bit different in that its primary audience for their work is government and the policymakers. And secondly, also their funding and leadership usually rests in the hands of the state as well. And quite often they're staffed with government staff, government employees, and that means that they're subject to rules of the government bureaucracies. But there's actually quite a lot of different models of government think tanks. Some of them are very independent and receive their funding from government, but essentially otherwise they almost operate on their own autonomy, whereas others are almost a bit more of an arm of the state in a way. So there's quite a variety. They have several benefits. So, for example, they have a really strong understanding of what the government's programs are that already exist and their current priorities, so their advice is tailored to actual needs. And also, they have an awareness of the kinds of entry points and timeframes that government policymakers are working with, so that often means that they can have uptake at the right points if they're lucky. And they have a longevity as well, and often sustained funding, which means they can attract really high quality staff. But I think one of the more important points is that government sees them as one of us rather than one of them. So they're able to provide really frank advice, and I guess they're able to coordinate across government ministries or departments in a way that I think an external think tank might find really challenging. Well, they have some things to watch out for, I suppose. For example, their reporting lines are to government, so they're often careful about the advice that they have to provide. And there is some potential to overlap with existing government functions. I mean, governments are already providing performance audits of their own departments, and the line ministries are doing analysis, and there's evaluation happening. So you want to be careful that a government think tank is not duplicating those roles, I suppose. And without a clear reporting line or mandate, government itself is enormous, so you could get lost in the scope of it if you weren't sure what you were working on. It was really interesting. I looked at probably about 20 or 25 different government think tanks around the world, and I looked at some particularly in Southeast Asia and around Indonesia that I thought might be more relevant. And the Korean Development Institute, KDI, is really interesting, and the Indian Planning Commission as well is being reformed by President Modi at present. So that was really useful. And the types of factors that I was considering when looking into these different examples were things like, how independent are they? What are their reporting lines? Do they have a primary audience of government and that's their only audience, or do they also do some public outreach opportunities? Do they provide publications on their website so that the public can get involved in the types of policy dialogue that they're initiating? What's their size and structure? And other elements, I tried to look at what might be interesting for Indonesia from these. There were several different findings that I thought were probably the most important ones to take away from looking at these different models. So first and foremost, you need to have a clear mandate with a clear reporting structure. Otherwise, it's so easy to get lost or to be unsure about the type of work that you're producing and suddenly have to work in several directions all at once. So clear mandate, clear reporting structure. Also, some of the more successful models were very lucky to have a high-level senior government person who provided strong leadership and were able to make sure that the research they produced was provided into the right places and saw uptake there. There's a current trend as well towards embracing a variety of skill sets within these types of think tanks. So not just having one formal stream of people, say economists, but actually having a blend of those skills so that everyone together provides a fresh perspective into an issue and sometimes can bring different things to the table with a new insight. Some of the other things that were really interesting were how you make sure that this type of institution doesn't become a briefing machine, because quite often a lot of public policymakers need something quite urgently and they need analysis on a topic and they need it tomorrow. And so there's a need to be very responsive, but you have to balance that as well with the longer term research agenda and some of the more strategic decisions that you're hoping to inform. So finding the balance between those two things. And some of the models that were very successful had a decision made from the very outset about what their audience was going to be. So they knew from day one whether they were going to have just government as their primary audience or whether they were going to have more transparency and public outreach as well. And I think also highly successful models had produced a variety of different outputs for different audiences. So sometimes you have a policymaker who would like a very detailed analytical research piece, and sometimes it might be more appropriate to do a PowerPoint or a workshop. So there's a big spectrum there, and they were able to capture the needs quite accurately and make sure that it was what was required. You have to read the report.